All right, let's jump right into the world of mental health treatments. You've given us some pretty intense material to work with. Excerpts from the Handbook of Clinical Psychopharmacology for Therapists talk about a mouthful.
It really is quite a dense read.
But that's what we're here for, right? We'll break it down and find the most interesting points.
Exactly. And I think there's going to be a lot to unpack, especially when we look at how these concepts play out in real-world scenarios.
Absolutely. So today we're diving into two main areas: antipsychotic medications, and then, how about this, the world of herbal remedies.
Oh, that's a fascinating contrast, and it's interesting to see how those two worlds sometimes intersect.
Right. I mean, think about it. You have these potent pharmaceuticals that are backed by decades of scientific research. And then on the other hand, you have these ancient traditions of using plants for healing.
And both approaches are gaining traction in the field of mental health. It's a really dynamic time to be exploring these topics.
Totally. And I have a feeling a lot of people would be surprised by how relevant this all is. It's not just for, healthcare professionals or researchers. This stuff impacts everyone, whether we realize it or not.
I couldn't agree more. Mental health is something we all deal with, directly or indirectly. And understanding the tools and approaches available can be incredibly empowering.
Okay, so let's get down to business. We've got this handbook, and it really takes us on a journey through the history of how we think about and treat conditions like psychosis, which is pretty wild. Like, did you know that before the 1950s, treatments for these conditions weren't very effective?
It's true, the pre-1950s era was a very different landscape in mental health. Approaches were often limited and not always evidence-based.
And then along came these antipsychotics, and it was like a complete game changer. I mean, they actually worked. It seems like the handbook really emphasizes that shift the arrival of these medications as a pivotal moment in the field.
Absolutely, it was a paradigm shift, and it led to a deeper understanding of the biological mechanisms at play in conditions like schizophrenia.
The handbook specifically mentions the discovery that antipsychotics block dopamine receptors in the brain, which is huge. That seems to be the foundation of the dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia.
Right. The dopamine hypothesis suggests that an overactivity of dopamine in certain areas of the brain contributes to the symptoms of schizophrenia, and the fact that these antipsychotic medications could block those receptors provided strong support for that idea.
It's like, wow, we're actually starting to unlock the secrets of the brain and how it relates to these complex mental states. So if blocking dopamine is so effective in managing psychosis, are there any downsides? The handbook mentions side effects, and that's a huge part of the equation too.
Of course, there's always a balance between effectiveness and potential side effects with any medication, and antipsychotics are no exception. The early antipsychotics, which were often referred to as neuroleptics, were pretty effective, but they did come with some significant neurological side effects.
Neuroleptics, that sounds kind of intense. What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's not a term we use as much anymore, but basically it just means medications that act on the nervous system to produce a calming effect. So they can reduce agitation and psychotic symptoms, but they can also impact movement and other neurological functions.
I see. So what kinds of side effects are we talking about here?
Well, some common ones included tremors, muscle spasm, and this thing called akathisia.
Akathisia. Never heard of it.
It's this really unpleasant feeling of inner restlessness. Imagine not being able to sit still, feeling like you constantly have to move. It can be pretty distressing.
That sounds awful. I can see why those side effects would be a major concern.
Absolutely. And that's why research continued, leading to the development of what we called second generation or atypical antipsychotics.
So like a new and improved version, what makes them different from the first generation?
Well, they were designed to be more targeted, so the goal was to reduce those motor side effects. And they do that by acting on a different balance of neurotransmitters in the brain.
Okay, so instead of just focusing on blocking dopamine, they also work on other neurotransmitters like serotonin, right?
Right. Serotonin's involved in all sorts of things like mood regulation, sleep, appetite. And by targeting serotonin, these newer meds could also potentially address some of the so-called negative symptoms of schizophrenia, like apathy or social withdrawal.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a two-pronged approach, targeting the hallucinations and delusions, but also trying to improve mood and motivation.
Exactly, and that was a big step forward. Medications like clozapine, risperidone, olanzapine, those all emerged during the second wave of development and offered new hope for people struggling with schizophrenia.
But the handbook also makes it clear that even these newer medications, they're not perfect, are they? There are still potential downsides.
You're right, there's no magic bullet. There are always trade-offs, and some of the issues that came up with these second-generation antipsychotics were things like weight gain, metabolic changes, and even in rare cases, some serious blood disorders.
Okay, so it's still a balancing act, weighing the potential benefits against the potential risks. And I guess that's where personalized medicine comes in. What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to work closely with the healthcare professionals who can monitor your progress and adjust treatment as needed. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to mental health.
Makes sense. Now, I know we've been talking a lot about these different medications and how they work on the brain, but the handbook also dives into some of the psychotherapeutic issues that are involved in treating someone with a psychotic disorder. And I think that's important to acknowledge.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about prescribing a pill and calling it a day. These are complex conditions that affect every aspect of a person's life.
Right. It's about providing comprehensive care that addresses the whole person, not just their symptoms. So therapy, along with medication, can be a powerful combination.
Definitely. And I think it's something we'll delve into more deeply as we continue our deep dive, because understanding those psychological and emotional aspects of these conditions is just as important as understanding the biology.
I agree. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. And I think it's a good reminder that these aren't just abstract concepts we're talking about. These are real people with real lives. And these treatments, they have the potential to make a profound difference in their ability to live fulfilling and meaningful lives.
It's amazing, when you really dive into this stuff, how much our understanding of these medications has evolved over time. Even the names we use for them, right? The handbook even points that out. It's a reflection of how our thinking has shifted. Yeah, we touched on neuroleptics earlier, which sounds kind of old school now, doesn't it?
Exactly. And even the way we categorize these medications, talking about generations of antipsychotics, I mean, each wave of development has brought about these new insights and approaches. It's fascinating.
It really is. And the handbook actually has this really helpful table. It lists out all these different antipsychotics, both first and second generation, along with their typical dosages and common side effects. I mean, it's really useful for getting a grasp on the nuances of each one.
Oh yeah, that table is gold. And it really highlights the importance of personalized treatment. Like what works for one person might not work for another. Those individual variations are huge.
Absolutely. So let's talk specifics. We mentioned chlorpromazine earlier, one of the first antipsychotics. The handbook calls it a pioneer. What's the story there?
Chlorpromazine, or Thorazine as it was originally marketed, was a total game changer. It's funny, it was first used as a sedative, but then in the 1950s, boom, they discovered its antipsychotic properties. It really was a turning point for the field.
It's so wild how a medication that was meant for one thing can end up revolutionizing treatment for something completely different. Like, what a happy accident.
Right. It really shows how important it is to keep an open mind in science. But of course, like any medication, chlorpromazine came with its own set of potential side effects. The handbook lists a whole bunch. You've got sedation, dry mouth, constipation, and even some neurological effects.
It sounds like those neurological side effects were a recurring issue with many of those first-generation antipsychotics.
Yeah, unfortunately they were, and that's what pushed researchers to look for other options, medications that might be more targeted. So you had haloperidol, which is better known as Haldol, and then flufenazine, also marketed as Prolixin. Both were developed later on, and they tended to be more potent than chlorpromazine, meaning you could use lower doses to get the desired effect.
But that increased potency, did it come with a price?
Sadly, yeah, they were very effective at reducing those positive symptoms of schizophrenia, like the hallucinations and delusions. But the risk of those neurological side effects, we talked about the tremors, muscle spasms, and akathisia, that risk went up too.
So it's that balance again, trying to find the sweet spot between maximizing benefits and minimizing those unwanted effects. It's tricky.
It really is, and that's part of what led to a shift away from certain practices that used to be more common. The handbook mentions something called rapid neuroleptization. Basically, it was this approach where they would use really high doses of antipsychotics to quickly control agitation and psychosis, especially in emergency situations.
I could see how that might have seemed like the way to go, especially when these medications were new and you're dealing with someone in acute distress.
Exactly. But over time, research showed that this approach wasn't always necessary and could actually lead to more severe side effects in the long run. They found that moderate doses could be just as effective and with fewer risks.
So it's like a move away from that more is better mentality. Recognizing that sometimes a less intense approach can actually be more beneficial in the long term.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important takeaway, that ongoing research and clinical experience can really lead to significant improvements in how we care for patients. It's about constantly refining our understanding.
Right, right. So we've talked about the first generation. What about the second generation or atypical antipsychotics? What makes them stand out?
Well, as we mentioned before, the goal with the second generation antipsychotics was to reduce those pesky motor side effects that were so common with the first generation. Plus, there was also the hope that these newer meds could better address some of those negative symptoms of schizophrenia.
And the handbook really highlights clozapine, which is marketed as Clozaril, as a major breakthrough in this category. What made it so special?
Clozapine was, and still is, super effective for people who didn't respond well to other antipsychotics. It really gave them a new chance at getting their symptoms under control. The problem is, it came with a pretty serious potential side effect, a granulocytosis.
That sounds scary. A granulocytosis.
It's a condition where your body doesn't produce enough white blood cells, making you super susceptible to infections. It's rare, but it can be life-threatening, so anyone taking clozapine has to get regular blood monitoring to make sure this side effect isn't developing.
So it's a powerful tool, but it comes with some serious risks.
Right, and because of those risks, doctors typically reserve clozapine for people who haven't had success with other antipsychotic medications.
Makes sense. The handbook also mentions risperidone and olanzapine as being two of the most commonly prescribed second-generation antipsychotics. Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, risperidone, also known as Risperdal, is often used to treat both the positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and it's sometimes even used for things like agitation and aggression in people with dementia.
I've also heard that risperidone comes in different forms. Is that right?
Yep, you can get it as a pill or as an injection, and that can be really helpful for people who have trouble remembering to take their medication every day. The injection can last for weeks, which can make a big difference in terms of sticking to the treatment plan.
That's awesome. Options are always a good thing. What about olanzapine? How does that compare to risperidone?
Olanzapine, which is sold as Zyprexa, is also used for schizophrenia, and it's often effective for managing those acute manic episodes that people with bipolar disorder experience. But there's a higher risk of those metabolic side effects we talked about earlier, like weight gain and changes in blood sugar.
So again, it comes down to that careful assessment of benefits and risks, right? And that close collaboration with a healthcare provider.
Exactly, it's a partnership. And beyond just the medications themselves, the handbook really stresses how important it is to consider the psychotherapeutic aspects of treating someone with a psychotic disorder.
Right. It's not just about the meds. It's about supporting the whole person.
That's it. Psychotherapy can play a huge role in helping individuals cope with their symptoms, develop strategies for managing their condition, and ultimately improve their quality of life.
It's that reminder that medication is just one piece of the puzzle.
Couldn't agree more. Open communication between the psychiatrist, the therapist, and the person receiving care, that's key. It's a team effort, and the individual should always be at the center of the care plan.
You got it. It's all about teamwork.
And, we've been focusing a lot on the science behind all of this, but it's important to remember that there's a human element too. We're talking about medications that can really impact people's lives, their challenges, their triumphs, their resilience. That's just as important as the pharmacology.
That's so true. At the end of the day, we're talking about real people with real lives. And these medications can truly make a difference in their ability to live full and meaningful lives.
Absolutely. Now remember that world of herbal remedies we promised to explore? We haven't forgotten about that. Ready to dive into that fascinating realm?
Bring it out. Let's shift gears and explore what plants have to offer in the world of mental health treatment. All right, so we've explored the world of antipsychotic medications pretty thoroughly. Now let's switch gears and talk about herbal remedies for mental health. This is where things get a little more, I don't know, mysterious, wouldn't you say?
There's definitely a certain mystique surrounding herbal remedies. I mean, humans have been using plants for healing for centuries, way before modern pharmaceuticals came along.
It's by tapping into this ancient wisdom, that connection to nature that so many of us crave, especially when it comes to our well-being.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned earlier, the popularity of herbal remedies has just exploded in recent years. It's like people are rediscovering the power of plants, searching for more natural ways to support their mental health.
But with so many options out there, it can be overwhelming. How do you even begin to sort through all the claims and figure out what's reliable?
Well, the handbook actually does a pretty good job of breaking down some of the most commonly used herbal remedies for mental health. It even delves into the research that's been done on their effectiveness, which is helpful.
Oh, that's great. So what are some of the highlights?
Well, one that's been around for ages is St. John's wort. It's often touted as a natural treatment for depression.
St. John's wort. Oh, yeah, I've definitely heard of that one. But does it actually work? What does the research say?
There have been studies suggesting that it can be helpful for a mild to moderate depression, but the evidence isn't totally conclusive. Some studies have shown mixed results, which is always the case with these things.
So it's not a guaranteed cure-all then?
Definitely not. And it's important to remember that even though it's a plant, St. John's wort can interact with certain medications.
Oh, right, like antidepressants and birth control pills, right?
Exactly. It's a good reminder that just because something is natural doesn't mean it's automatically safe or without potential side effects.
Okay, good point. So St. John's wort is one to be cautious about. What about some other popular herbal remedies? The handbook mentions kava kava as a traditional treatment for anxiety.
Ah, kava. Yeah, it has a long history of use in the Pacific Islands for relaxation and anxiety relief.
So like a natural chill pill.
You could say that. It's believed to work by enhancing the effects of GABA in the brain, which is a neurotransmitter that has calming effects.
Interesting. So have there been any studies on its effectiveness?
Yeah, some studies have shown that it can be effective for generalized anxiety disorder, but there have also been some concerns raised about potential liver toxicity with long-term use.
Okay, so another one where you have to weigh the potential benefits against the risks. It seems like that's an occurring theme with both pharmaceuticals and herbal remedies.
It really is, and it just highlights the importance of personalized care and open communication with your doctor.
Absolutely. Speaking of benefits and risks, the handbook also touches on ginkgo biloba, which is often used for memory and cognitive function. What are your thoughts on ginkgo?
Ginkgo is thought to improve blood flow to the brain, and there's been some preliminary research suggesting it might be helpful for age-related memory decline, maybe even Alzheimer's. But we need more research to confirm those findings.
So it's a promising area of research, but not a proven solution just yet. It's exciting to see how science is being applied to these traditional remedies, helping us understand how they work.
I agree, and I think it reflects this growing movement towards integrative medicine, where conventional and complementary approaches are being used together.
It's like we're expanding your toolbox, right? Exploring different options and figuring out what works best for each individual.
Exactly. And on that note, I do want to emphasize that what we've discussed today is just a tiny snapshot of the vast world of herbal remedies. There are so many other plants and botanicals out there, each with its own unique properties and potential applications.
It's amazing to think about all the possibilities that nature holds. But with that potential comes responsibility, right? We need to approach these remedies with caution and awareness.
Absolutely. It's crucial to do your research, be critical of any claims you come across, and always talk to your healthcare provider before trying anything new.
Great advice. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've gone from those groundbreaking discoveries of antipsychotics to the ancient wisdom of herbal remedies. What are some key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
I think the main thing is that we've come a long way in how we understand and treat mental health. Antipsychotics have been revolutionary, offering effective treatments for managing symptoms. And while herbal remedies can be intriguing and potentially beneficial, it's important to approach them cautiously, do your research, and always consult with your doctor.
Well said. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our mental health. By understanding the science, being critical of what we hear, and working closely with healthcare professionals, we can make informed decisions for ourselves and those we care about.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into antipsychotics and herbal remedies. Until next time, everyone, take care and stay curious.